All right, welcome to the 2018 Citizens Academy, the first class of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We'll be starting shortly. In our respect for the class and our guests, please make sure you turn your cell phones to silent or your pagers. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have the unique privilege and pleasure to have with us today for our 2018 Citizens Academy discussion panel, in no particular order, Chief David Hoffman, Lieutenant Colonel Kerry Forstall, Special Agent in Charge Grant Mendenhall, Mr. Josh Minkler, Prosecutor Terry Curry, Chief Brian Roach, and Colonel Mark French. I'm going to start from my left, your right, and have each one of the panelists introduce themselves. Chief.
Good evening, everyone. For the Citizens Academy students, you all know me. My name's David Hoffman. We met last week. Glad to see you all back. I am the Chief of Police for the Lawrence Police Department. I'm in my third year, appointed by Mayor Steve Collier. I come to you from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, where I worked for 18 years. Although I'm not really an outsider to Lawrence anymore. When I first came to the Lawrence Police Department, I didn't really feel like an outsider because I've lived either in the city of Lawrence or in Lawrence Township for more than 20 years. Raised my family here, and just a great part of the county to live in, and an even better part of the county to be in law enforcement in. So thank you all for coming tonight, and I think you're in for what I think is going to be a really exciting, informative evening.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Kerry Forstall. I'm here on behalf of Sheriff John Layton. I happen to be a resident of Lawrence Township. I was a City of Lawrence resident up until about 2 years ago when I bought my daughter's house, which is slightly outside. 35 years with the Sheriff's Office, and then 5 years I was a United States Marshal, and returned a few years ago to work for Sheriff Layton. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm Grant Mendenhall. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Indianapolis Division, which covers the state of Indiana. Actually in my fourth week in this job, and very happy to be back in Indiana. I've been gone for 31 years. My wife and I are both from the state of Indiana. So it's great to be back home. I look forward to chatting with you tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Josh Minkler. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana, and the Southern District of Indiana covers 60 counties, essentially from Kokomo down to the Ohio River. For your information, that's essentially the federal prosecutor's office for that area. So we prosecute all violations of federal law occurring in those 60 counties that would be investigated by Grant's agency. The United States Attorney is appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Mark French. I'm here, and I bring the regrets of my boss, Superintendent Doug Carter. He very much wanted to be here tonight, but he is in Tennessee this evening at a conference with some other superintendents from around the country. So I am here in his place, and I appreciate the welcome and the invite. I've been a trooper for about 28 years, give or take a month or two. And ironically, I'm a trooper that happens to live my entire life in Indianapolis, thereabouts anyway. I currently live in Broad Ripple, so I'm a neighbor.
Brian Roach, Chief of the Indianapolis Police Department. I start my 28th year with Indianapolis in April. Went to Lawrence North High School, moved here when Fort Harrison was Fort Harrison. My dad was retired military and was a recruiter here and finished off his career here. So I've lived here since I was about 11 or 12 years old. So my three kids who are now grown up went to Lawrence Central High School, so we have a rival within our home. Happy to be here. And I applied for the Lawrence Police Department before I got on with the city, and they rejected me. So,
Move.
yeah, smart move on their part. So glad to be here.
I am Terry Curry, Marion County Prosecutor. First, I'd like to introduce some members of our office who are here tonight. Ryan Mears is the back. He's Chief Trial Deputy in our office. Sharon Ely is a Deputy Prosecutor in our Community Prosecution Division. She works with the police departments of Beech Grove, Speedway, and Lawrence. So she works with Chief Hoffman and the officers in our office. Peg McLeish is our Communications Director. Anna Bowman is a new member of our Communications staff. And in front of them is my boss, Annie Kern, our Outreach Coordinator, tells me where to be all the time. Just briefly about our office, on the criminal side, our responsibility is to prosecute any crime that touches upon Marion County. We resolve about 25 to 30,000 criminal cases each year. That's everything from the most minor offenses such as public intoxication all the way up to homicides. We have almost 400 employees in our office. 182 of those are attorneys or deputy prosecutors, so we're actually the equivalent of the third largest law firm in the city. In addition to our criminal responsibility, we have responsibility for collecting child support on behalf of custodial parents and their children, and we collect approximately $100 million a year in child support on behalf of custodial parents.
Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, at this time, I would like, during the academy class, we first started off with asking that each one of the students provide a couple questions for our law enforcement leaders here in Marion County, local, state, and federal partners. And out of that collective of questioning, there was approximately about 70 questions that were presented. So if you don't hear your question tonight, one of two things are probably going to happen throughout the academy. Your question will be answered because there are multiple layers into the academy where some of those questions will be answered as we go through. But for tonight, the questions that we have, we want to at least let the panelists answer those questions. Hold about 2 minutes per question. We have a lot of questions to try to sift through a little bit. I know that's probably going to be a little bit hard. But we're going to try to make it through the majority of the questions tonight that you have referenced to the ones that you had sent. So let us go ahead and begin with our first question. Our first question is posed to Prosecutor Curry. With the recent school shootings in Parkland, Florida, there has been decisions about arming teachers and other school staff. How would this impact law enforcement, and what difficulties would it cause when responding to such an incident?
Well, in part, I would defer to my friend Chief Roach here in terms of the impact on law enforcement, but just from our perspective as a prosecutor, we feel that arming teachers is a horrible, horrible idea. And that security for schools should be left to the school resource officers. Virtually every school district in the state, in this country, has to one degree or another internal security. And if it's necessary to have additional training or additional personnel in that role, then that's, in my opinion, where school security should come from. That we should not be arming teachers.
And I didn't explain this earlier, and if any of the other panelists would like to go ahead and add on to any of the questions that I asked, please feel free to do so.
Since the prosecutor told me to, I probably should. So I would agree with that. So law enforcement, it adds an additional kind of unknown as you enter those schools. There's a lot of, it should be left to professionals. Teachers should teach. And receive that kind of training. We have officers that go through a lot of training, and those are difficult decisions to make when you decide to fire that firearm, and sometimes we get it wrong. And so I would just feel much better for those that are in the law enforcement field providing that security in our schools.
And if I could add one thing as well, that it's sort of a related issue. I just heard within the last week that, just like in other large situations, that the communication network essentially broke down because of the overload of the system, just like happened in 9/11. And after 9/11, when first responders could not communicate because the networks were overloaded, there was a process started that ultimately has led to the creation of a board called FirstNet. And there in the process, we actually had a person who is a friend of mine who's on the FirstNet board came and talked to our office and members of law enforcement agencies, and that when FirstNet is up and running, what it effectively will do is create a separate network devoted solely to first responders, firefighters, police officers, so that there'll be, whether it's in a school shooting or any other sort of situation like that, there will be no interference with the communication among those who are responding, which I think will be a huge, huge improvement.
Chief, I think I can speak a little bit to the Lawrence Township environment when it comes to school safety. With the two primary high schools that we have in the Lawrence area, Lawrence North and Lawrence Central, we have a very close partnership with the Lawrence Police Department and the Metropolitan School District of Lawrence Township. And I can tell you, without going too deep into details in a public forum like this, Dr. Sean Smith, who's the superintendent, has made school safety an absolute priority, as I know all superintendents do. He's invested unbelievable amounts of funding directly towards school safety in a wide variety of manners. And it's no secret. I mean, you can drive by any of our high schools and middle schools in the morning or the afternoon. You see police cars. We actually have IMPD officers who come into this neck of our community, and they work some off-duty employment as well, in addition to a civilian security staff. So they're not armed, but they are security guards who monitor and communicate. And I don't think this is just a single prong approach to school safety. I think we have to look at everything from getting guidance counselors in tune to kids that are displaying signs of distress, getting students comfortable with reporting other students who post disturbing messages and images on social media. I think there's so many. It's a very, very complex situation, and I think now is the time, probably more than any other time in our country's history, that this is really finally being discussed and analyzed, and it goes so much further than the debate about arming teachers.
Our next question is for U.S. District Attorney Menkler. To what extent does the implementation of the Castle Doctrine in Indiana limits one's responsibility to flee?
Well, so when you're talking about possession of firearms and sort of self-defense issue in the Castle Doctrine, federal law enforcement and federal jurisdiction is pretty limited. Most of the violent crime prosecutions and whether somebody has the right to defend themselves are determinations made, at least in Indiana, under state law. Federal law, with regard to firearms, is pretty specific on who is allowed to possess a firearm and who is not. And people are prohibited, if you have a prior felony offense, if you're in the country illegally, there are different reasons, if you're under a restraining order, if you're charged with a federal crime, from prohibiting, from possessing a firearm. And the fact that you possess that firearm in your own home, or you possess that firearm possibly for self-defense, is not a defense to a federal crime of possessing a firearm if you're a prohibited person. But the federal violent crime prosecution statutes are very narrow, usually limited to being on federal land or in a commercial establishment where the Castle Doctrine doesn't really apply. So that's probably more of a question of interpretation of state law here in Indiana.
And likewise, if An officer is entitled to knock on the door or to enter a residence because having a search warrant, the Castle Doctrine would not be a defense that would prohibit the officer from entering the house and corresponding would not allow the homeowner to attempt to shoot the officer if they're entering with a search warrant.
That was,
And of course, and likewise, just as Josh has mentioned, the fact that if you're not entitled to have possession of a firearm because of a prior felony conviction or otherwise, the fact you have it in your home does not mean that you can legally possess it in your home.
it was, when that doctrine came out, it was a concern for law enforcement. Because the fear was that it would be, people would be making determinations of whether it was lawful or not for us to be there or to stop a car or to be at their home but that's the key, right? So people have to understand that in order for that doctrine to be effective, the police officers have to be in a position where it's unlawful. And so there's some fear around that, but we really haven't, that's gone. And we continue to do our jobs, and I think most people respect that and understand that. And I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to have discussions and explain why we're doing what it is we're doing and why we are where we're at, and to explain that lawfulness as soon as we can.
The next question is for Colonel Forstall. Generally speaking, how does law enforcement in the city and municipal, state, and federal levels collaborate in the pursuit of ensuring public safety? Can the panel provide an example where law enforcement from 2 or more levels work together to address a public safety issue or specific case?
I think just the people sitting on the panel here are excellent examples of being able to work together. I've had a chance for working with Chief Roach on various times. We have deputies that are working with our IMPD officers, our various task forces, as well as I know the SAC here from the FBI has only been here a short time, but we've worked with FBI and continue to work with the FBI in task force situations. Colonel French over there, we couldn't do it without the state police backing us up. People have county lines, but the bad guys don't know the county lines. If we need to cross over and cross back in a second, we can call the state police and count on them to support us anywhere around there. So it's a teamwork like that that makes this all.
And just in your area, 42nd and Post, IMPD's struggled with homicides the first part of the year, and we called on Lawrence and state police, and I think you spent several days there with maybe 30 officers. So that occurs all the time. And all of us, I think, are comfortable calling each other and saying, hey, we need help. Every 2 weeks, we have what's called the Indianapolis Violence Reduction Partnership, where everybody in this room and actually the people that actually do the work get together every 2 weeks and talk about people and places and behaviors so that our initiatives and our resources are targeted to those people that are committing the violence. And really, as you travel around, that's the kind of cooperation that we have here in Indianapolis with everybody involved in law enforcement is really unheard of in other cities, especially the federal and local participation.
Our office works virtually every single day, even though we are the county prosecutor with ATF, FBI, Secret Service, and as Josh can confirm, in virtually every single large drug investigation, there's discussions between our offices as to, all right, we'll charge this person state, we'll charge this person at federal, and that happens all the time.
I think I can comment just on the partnership piece. And you see a huge chunk of the law enforcement toolbox for the metro area sitting up here tonight, but just from the FBI's perspective, we don't, especially in the violent crime program, we don't do, as a federal agency, we do almost nothing by ourselves. Almost everything we do that has any significance, either from a community impact standpoint or a national impact standpoint, for that matter, we do in partnership with our other federal partners, our state and local partners, every step of the way. So again, I mean, what you see represented up here tonight, this is the way we do business every day. It's not unique that we're all sitting in this room together tonight. And as Chief Roach pointed out, the way law enforcement interacts in the state of Indiana, not just in Indianapolis, but across the entire state, is really a model for law enforcement cooperation around the country. Indiana is talked about outside of Indiana as a model for law enforcement cooperation. So kind of what you see up here tonight is what you get. This is the way we do business on day to day in our casework.
If I could add to that, in fact, I was just having this conversation with SAC a couple days ago. First of all, it's what you should expect, is what I would tell you. It's what you should expect. But I'll give you a little story that will hit home to you, because many of you were probably sitting here in the city of Indianapolis when we had the Super Bowl a few years ago. And we had federal partners from all over the country that came in. And the one thing that they reiterated to us in a lot of the meetings that I was a part of was they were amazed at how we all got along with each other. I don't know if that's just the way Hoosiers roll. I'm not sure, but they were surprised by that. And like I said, you should expect that. But I can tell you that at least where we're at right now, you're well served in that regard. All these agencies cooperate productively for the good of the citizens.
Our next question is for Chief Roach. Are there any metrics other than violent crimes per capita and burglary rates that are used to measure the effectiveness of law enforcement?
Yeah, so measuring is something that historically we don't do very well. Probably the best metric is the absence of crime, and that's really what we look for. And at 9 o'clock every morning, our operations deputy chief, who's responsible for all of our districts, has a phone call with each one of those district commanders and asks them about the 24 hours before. And the focus is violent crime right now for us. But there's other things that kind of lead to that, right? We also talk about robberies, whether they're street robberies or business robberies. But the intent of that is that the measurement of that is not how many they had, but the areas where that was reduced. And so the commanders are asked to put together an initiative for that day. Here's what happened. Here's a pattern we're seeing. What is it you're going to do about it on each one of those shifts? Those commanders put together that patrol plan and push it down to their officers. And the intent there is so when they have that conversation again with the operations deputy chief, is they're not talking about that area anymore because those crimes are absent. So there's all kinds of things that we have started to measure. The impact of mental health. It has been significant on law enforcement and prosecutor's office and the jails and really everywhere. And it's measuring how many of those people who have mental health issues and substance abuse issues that used to be arrested because that was the way to do it, because the thought was you get them in the system and then they can get some help. Where now it's trying to create kind of a pre-entry, right? So it's getting them before you put them in the system and associating them with those services. So in Indianapolis, on the east side, we started what's called an MCAT program. So there's a mental health professional, there's a law enforcement officer, and there's a paramedic that ride around together and take those mental and emotional runs. And again, the goal is for there to be a absence of their interaction in the justice system. So are they on medication? Are they already in the system? Who is the doctor? And it's helping them navigate that process rather than the other tools were either arrest them or to, if they're in danger to themselves or others, to take them to the hospital. And both of which historically have not been effective. And so we have to find other ways. So measuring is important. Historically, we haven't been very good at it. A lot of it deals with technology and the ability to pull all the data from all the different silos of information that we have, and we're trying to get better at that. Long-winded answer.
Our next question is actually going to come from one of the Academy students. If Ms. Stacy, you want to approach and you can go ahead and ask your question, please.
Hello.
Hello, Stacy.
Actually, you've addressed the question a little bit already, but I would love to hear, based on recent events in Florida and the complete failure of the federal, state, and local police in handling this individual and event, what intra-department communicating, sharing, critical incident response measures have you put into place to ensure this will not happen in Lawrence?
So in Lawrence, I did kind of touch on it already regarding the employment of Lawrence police officers and IMPD officers in our township schools. And I didn't mention earlier something that is a little different in each of the 9 townships in Marion County. Some townships have school police departments. I believe Pike and Washington Township have school police departments. Warren Township, of course, Center Township has IPS. And I want to say maybe Franklin Township has brought on some police officers as well. So police officers on school grounds during school hours is definitely a push right now. Communication between police departments and school systems is big. Patrols around schools as well. So I don't know if that hits on it. If you're asking, have we implemented a new strategy right now since Parkland, I'd say the answer is no. We have this growing initiative that unfortunately has been highlighted by some failures in Parkland. I wouldn't classify it, by the way, as a total failure. There were officers from Coral Springs, Florida, Police Department who went in that building looking for the shooter. Now, as we now know, he escaped with the crowd. But there was although some failures occurred, there was some tremendously brave actions of police officers and EMS personnel as well that day. So I wouldn't classify it exactly as a total failure. Can we grow? Absolutely. Should we? We certainly should. But anybody else have any thoughts? I mean, I know on Southwest District, there's a lot of partnerships with Decatur Township and Wayne.
Right, in the metro school, and Chief Hoffman hit on something when he talked about it earlier about people being more willing to share information about individuals, and so we've seen that. We had the system, but we probably what we've done is we've communicated it a little better. So even when our federal partners get people send it to the feds, right? Because they got everything, they know everything. So they send it to them, but then, what they do is they do a great job at, that's a local issue, and they'll disseminate it to us. And so we have an intelligence unit that brings in all that information, and then they investigate that. And since Parkland, we've had issues at several different high schools where people have come forward and where we've made arrests on kids who have made, whether it's social media posts or whatever it is. So we're seeing that a little more, and I don't know if it's because people are starting to realize, hey, when you see those things, there is a manner in order to disseminate that information, and the police are actually acting on it. So we have seen an increase of that. We do have a system, like you said, that system has already existed, but maybe we're doing a better job of educating people that we want to know about those things that you see on social media, and we want to know about those individuals that you think may have a propensity for violence so that we can get our arms around them some way. And the interaction with the school and the school police is very good, and like all of us as partners, we're always communicating with them. And we're
Another example, if I can, because it's so pertinent, the Lawrence Township School Systems recently purchased an explosives detecting canine for Lawrence Police Department to use. Now, because he's a Lawrence Police Department canine handler, he's in the Lawrence Township schools all the time. We also have a narcotics detection dog that spends the majority of his day in our schools. So sniffing out drugs and guns in our schools, it's all part of increasing school safety.
Actually, as I look at it, I'm always surprised, sort of to the opposite side of what you pointed out, that when members of the public report something either to IMPD or a federal agency, how well they work together to identify that target, and then bring appropriate action. Some coverage recently about an individual who was in possession of a rifle with a scope that was reported by a hotel to IMPD. They followed up on it. There were some immigration issues which they coordinated with the federal authorities. And so both the prosecutor's office and the U.S. Attorney's office and the federal agencies and IMPD worked very well at identifying a potential threat and putting that person in a position where he was no longer a threat and faces some pretty serious consequences.
Thank you.
Our next question is for Mr. Mendenhall. Why is there an age limit beyond which the FBI and police, well, actually, this is pretty much a full panel discussion as well. Why is there an age limit beyond which the FBI and police department will not accept applications? In the case of the FBI in particular, applications for non-field jobs are not open to individuals beyond a certain age.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It actually sparked a conversation in my office this afternoon. So there are two different parts of this. Not everybody in the FBI is an FBI agent. So the way we hire on the agent side and the professional staff side are fairly significantly different. Agents, you can only work to 57. We have mandatory retirement at 57, believe it or not. So an agent's career is based on being able to do a 20-year career to get a pension either after 50 or before age 57. On the professional staff side, to get a pension, you have to work for 30 years. So, I mean, the question about age restrictions, there aren't age restrictions. I mean, I've worked with dozens of FBI employees over the years that we hired in their 40s and their 50s, and they work for 4 or 5 years, and then they don't retire because they can't get a pension at that point, so they're not formally retired. But we have employees all the time that work or hired, like I said, in their 40s, 50s, work for 10 years, work for a handful of years, and then they either stop working or go on to do something else. So there's not an age restriction per se, but on the agent side, the oldest, without a waiver, the oldest you can come in as an agent is 37. So it's based on a 20-year career, with 57 being mandatory retirement, so you can get a pension. That being said, we had an agent about 4 years ago that went to the FBI Academy, and he was 50 years old. And he was a military veteran, a combat veteran. So especially in the post 9/11 era, there've been dozens and dozens of agents who came into the FBI after age 37. Almost all of them were military veterans, and they got an age waiver to come in after 37. But again, on the professional staff side, there's no age restriction, but for pension purposes, you have to work for 30 years.
Can I piggyback on that question? What kind of new young agents, what are you looking for? No, I'm serious because like on the local and state level,
Yeah.
I hear that with the FBI, you're looking for people with foreign language specialties and cyber specialties and cultural expansion, stuff like that. Is that?
That's interesting because I have none of those things. So that's a great question. I appreciate you asking it, Chief. Give me a chance to do some recruiting tonight. On the agent side of the house, we're looking for everybody. Like our state and local counterparts, we firmly believe in the fact that our effectiveness as an organization, in large part, can be measured by how effectively we reflect the communities we serve. So I was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, and I was a political science major at Ball State. So the special skills that are required to do a lot of jobs that FBI agents do Absolutely. We look for people that have, we look for attorneys, we look for people that have experience in computer engineering. We look for people with foreign language capability, we look for people with overseas and various cultural experiences, because again, and not to oversimplify it, but again, we have to be a reflection of the communities we serve, and we have to be able to interact with the communities we serve. So diversity is huge for us. And our former Director Comey talked a lot about this during his tenure as the director. We have to maintain our focus on ensuring we are, in our workforce, we are reflecting the communities we serve, because it makes us better. It develops more trust among our public partnerships, which you all represent, which is hugely important to us. We can't do our jobs without you. But just from a technical standpoint, well, I can just tell you, back when I went to the academy 28 years ago, I had 32 people in my class. Eight of us were from the military, 8 of us were former law enforcement, and the other half of the class was everybody from high school teachers to bank managers to a professional football player. You name it. There's an FBI agent that's done that job prior to coming into the FBI. So yes, we look for highly technically skilled individuals, but we also look for individuals from extremely varied backgrounds.
As to age limitations, all you have to do is look at me to tell we have no age limitations.
But you weren't hired yesterday either, though, right?
It's true.
The next question is for Chief Hoffman. How do officers in your department deal with the negative perception of law enforcement by news and other media outlets?
I read that question in advance, and I kind of disagree with the whole premise of the question. I think our partnerships with our media folks, at least in this market, have never been better. When we do it right, they highlight it. When we do it wrong, they highlight it, and we answer to them. There's an overused word right now in our profession called transparency, and although it's overused, it's something that the public demands of us. So, I think especially no offense to our older officers who have maybe come up in the profession seeing TV cameras as the enemy, but I think our younger officers their perception of TV cameras is pretty good. It shows that we're doing the right things at the right time, the right way, for the right reasons. And overwhelmingly, I think our community is seeing the hard work, the dedication, the sacrifice that our officers are making. I unfortunately can point out that this is no more timely than if anybody in Indiana watched the news on Friday and watched the funeral proceedings of Deputy Jacob Pickett. So they're seeing the risks that we're taking on their behalf. And again, when we mess up, we own it. But I think 95+% of the time, the stories that you see about police officers and our response to critical incidents and violence and danger is being very well received by the public. I mean, we're in a time now when we have our residents putting blue porch lights on their houses at night, and thin blue line stickers are everywhere. So we're seeing the silent majority is becoming less and less silent, and I think that's a great thing. And I think obviously our officers and our agencies are to credit, but also I think it's the media that come out, and just like earlier tonight, you saw a cameraman here from Fox 59 who was highlighting this event as something very positive in the city of Lawrence and in Indianapolis overall. So sorry to be long-winded about that, but I kind of disagree with the question, and I think we're in a good time right now in police community relations.
Well, I don't watch the media or read the paper, so a little different view, I guess. But I think the same view in the sense that I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we understand those perceptions and do what we can to mitigate that, because some of those perceptions become reality, and it's up to us to look at our own behavior and see if there's any adjustments that we can make so that perception goes away. And it's different in different communities for us. And you have to manage and change the way you behave at some point in order to adjust that behavior. And so we always find ourselves trying to convince people maybe that we aren't what others say we are. But the minute, we do that by every interaction. So I think Marion County had 1 million runs. So that's 1 million times that you're having some sort of interaction with the person, and each one of those is important. And so it's instilling in our officers that no matter what run that they are on, that's a person that they're dealing with, and they need to be cognizant of the way that they're behaving. At the same time, it just takes one to set us back for quite some time, and it'll take us hundreds more of those interactions in order to prove otherwise. So I think the media takes things that sell papers and get your viewership, and and maybe leave some of the stuff that we do well, that what we're expected to do well. Maybe that doesn't get in there. So at least on our department, we're kind of constantly fighting that. And part of that we own. So it's a matter of trying to fix that, always being aware in that perception, and doing what we can to address that and adjust it. And that'll be an ongoing battle, I think. I was even more long-winded than you, Dave.
No, that's great. That's great.
The next question is for Colonel French. How important is it to have diversity on the police force? Do you do anything to promote it?
Yeah, we talk about this quite a bit. State police, we have about 1,300 troopers, give or take one or two, that transcend 92 different counties and several different specialized services that our department are responsible for. We struggle with diversity hiring. We have a residency academy that occurs at the ILEA in Plainfield, and it's a closed academy. So you're there Monday through Friday. You go home on a Friday night, and you're back on a Sunday night. It's a very paramilitary setting. Not everybody that wants to be a trooper is willing to live anywhere in the state of Indiana, or be picked up and have to relocate if that's where the department needs you. That gives us lots of challenges. We don't interact on a daily basis in a lot of metropolitan areas. Most of Indiana is very rural. You'll see a trooper in Indianapolis, but largely on the interstate. There's other troopers out moving around the city, but you wouldn't recognize them as troopers. So it's hard to generate that interest from a minority group that might be interested in what we do because they think that we're going to send them to the shadows of Louisville, a long way from where they might be from. We stay diligent to it. We've got a dedicated recruiting staff that falls under our human resources division. Move around into those communities and in those areas where we believe we might be able to track that interest. But it's an uphill battle for us because of where the applicant might have to live that doesn't coincide with what they want to do. And it's not just black or Hispanic male troopers, but we have a very difficult time hiring female troopers of any race. It's a never-ending struggle. We try to educate ourselves at every turn. We reach out to our other counterparts. Largely, we try to reach out to other state agencies because they have these same geographical restrictions that we do. And we're constantly trying to learn and see what people are doing. But it's a struggle. Residency Academy, the thought that you can't live where you want, And oftentimes, I can't guarantee that I can send you back into the community where you came from. It's tough. And what I can tell you is that we keep trying. Can't give up. You can't give up on the hard stuff. So, and it's important. We need to look. The state police needs to look like the state of Indiana, and can't give up on that.
I think we all compete for the same candidates too. So we're competing against each other because all of us have an interest in looking like the community we serve. Marion County, if you just take African American, Marion County is 28%. Our police department is inching up to 15% African American. If you look at the workforce, so those between the ages of 21 and 37 for us, that's about 19 or 20% if you're just looking at African American community. So we're still not even there in the workforce. One thing that we as a police department have going for us now is that in years past, you never had an idea of when you were going to have an academy and how many people were going to be in the academy. So dollars were never dedicated, and so you weren't able to create a long-term plan. So under this mayor, I give him a lot of credit for the 4 years that he is here. He is committed to getting a net increase of 31 officers. So if I lose 70 officers a year, then I've got to hire 100 police officers. So I know that I can have 2 academies, and I can have 50 in each academy. So that tells me if I was just looking at black males, that means I need 10 black males in each one of those classes. So now rather than asking recruiters to cast this wide net and bring in everybody you can, they can specifically focus, and they can go to our local churches, and they can go to communities and specifically focus on 10 young black males that we want on our police department. So we've seen some of the fruit of that this last class. And females, we have a recruiting group that is now really promoting females. Just last Saturday, they did the Women Behind the Badge at our training academy. We had this is the second time they've done it. We had 30, 35 women there. There are Indiana standards, physical standards that are difficult for women to do, but just because we're built differently. And it takes them, where I could get a male to do push-ups, the number of push-ups in a relatively short manner of time, it takes me 6 months to get a female there. And so we start walking them through that every Tuesday. We have people that want to be police officers. We have a run club. So we're doing a lot more things in order to pull in both females and African-American males, and we're in a much better position because we know what that number is and we know what that goal is. In the past, we've just been trying to get everybody, and so it's much more laser-like and specific.
It's also very real to us. The state police were under a consent decree in the late 70s associated with courts coming along and saying, look, you can tell me all day long that you're trying, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to do this under a court order. And we stayed in that consent decree until the early 1980s. And I give that to you to tell you that it's a real thing with us. It's not a head fake. We understand that there are expectations, and they have to be met.
All right, this message is, I said message. Now, this next question is for Colonel Forstall. What motivates an individual to become a public servant, especially in the line of law enforcement? It certainly isn't the pay nor the benefits.
That's true. And it's not always because everybody likes you, because it does swing back and forth. Like the chief said, if you look back over the last couple of decades, sometimes the police are liked, sometimes they're not. But we usually come back around. But if you want to be liked all the time, then you should be a firefighter. But it's important that, I can't speak for everyone, but I think there's some bloodline. I had a uncle on my mom's side and my dad's side were both IPD officers. And my mother's father, my grandfather, was an IPD officer. So somewhere in there, I think that's where it came. I don't think as a kid anybody ever said he's going to be a police officer, because I didn't follow every rule. But once you become a police officer, that's what's important, is to follow the rules. So I think if we have a chance to serve the citizens, sometimes people say it's corny, but it's really important. I think you'll talk to a lot of police officers, is the children. I mean, there's times you see things as a police officer and you're glad you can do something for the kids because you've been put in that position. So I think that drives a lot of us.
You know, this whole recruiting discussion is interesting, but Chief Roach mentioned that we're all competing against each other for candidates, and it's really true. Very, very rarely do you have a candidate for the FBI that's not also applied for, like, a law enforcement agency. I'm a great example. The FBI got to me first. The other iron I had in the fire was Indiana State Police. So the FBI got to me first. That's why I'm an FBI agent now. So I think the motivation, kind of across the board for law enforcement, is being part of something that's bigger than yourself. I mean, it's just a service mentality, and it's not the FBI, it's not the Sheriff's Department, it's not the PD, not the prosecutor's office. It's everybody in the law enforcement and intelligence community. It's the same motivation. Where that type A personality that has a desire to serve ends up, sometimes you have control over that, sometimes you don't. But I think the motivation, I think everybody sitting up here tonight probably had basically the same motivation to do what we do now. I don't think it's unique. I just think it's a service mentality and a desire to be part of something bigger.
I would echo exactly what you said. I was a little bit of an outlier. I grew up in Mars Hill, the other side of town here. And when I tell people that, they're like, really? If you had told me that I was going to be a state trooper when I grew up, I'd have told you were crazy. Now, I work with a lot of guys. There's a lot of legacy troopers on our department. Their fathers and grandfathers were troopers. Our department generates that. But I'm an outlier. I never thought anything about being a police officer, let alone a state trooper. And I went into the military, and I came out, and I got a regular job, but it just didn't get me out of bed in the morning. And I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. And I think that's what a lot of people are drawn to. A lot of people say that when you sit in front of a panel and ask people why they want to be a police officer, you get a lot of imaginative things, but some of it you don't believe. But I think a lot of it has to do with I want something to get me out of bed in the morning, and I want to feel like I made a difference. So I agree with that completely.
The next question is for Mr. Curry. We are hearing in the media of the numerous criminal cases being dismissed or lost at the trial level due to uncooperative witnesses. Understand that many of these uncooperative witnesses are a result of individuals being in fear for their own safety and the safety of their family. Has the Marion County Prosecutor's Office ever looked at the possibility that some of the problems could be caused by a lack of communication between the assigned deputy prosecutor and the witnesses and or victims?
I guess I got my radar up immediately when it started with we are hearing in the media. I guess if we had 1,000 trials and won 999 of them, but lost one, that's the one you would hear about. But to answer the basic question in terms of communication with witnesses and victims, I honestly do not believe that to be the case. You know, given the numbers that I talked about, 25 to 30,000 criminal cases we resolve each year. Is there an occasion when it gets to me that a victim's upset with the individual deputy prosecutor for one reason? Yes, that happens on occasion, but it is not at the heart of the issue in terms of getting cooperation from the public. And really it falls into a number of categories in addition to witnesses or victims who might be intimidated or scared. Does that happen on occasion? Yes, but there are other circumstances where a witness is going to abide by the code of the street, the no snitching code. That happens. We have situations where a victim is going to get their own justice. And in addition, there are circumstances where we have witnesses who just don't want to be bothered. You know, it's not that they're scared, they just do not want to be bothered, they don't have to come downtown. And we try to address those situations in any number of ways. And going back to in terms of the communication, you know, with the knowledge that these things happen, that our witnesses might be transient, in the first instance, I can assure you that Chief Rocha's detectives will get every single possible source of information to stay in contact with that person during the investigation itself. If the matter gets filed and it gets to us, then we do the same. Our deputy prosecutors, our victim advocates will get all of that information. You know, what's your mama's phone number? You know, what's your email? Are you on Facebook? So that we have every possible way to stay in contact with those witnesses. Having said all of that, you know, in response to the question that was asked, and in terms of identifying the scope of the problem that we face, our office, in addition to IMPD and other agencies, track non-fatal shootings each year for a variety of reasons. And in calendar year 2017, there were 476 victims of non-fatal shootings in Marion County, individuals who had been shot but survived. Someone want to venture answers to the percentage of those victims who had been shot who declined in the first instance to cooperate with the police investigators? Over 50% of the time that occurred. And so on the one hand, is it a significant problem? Yes, it is. Does it always preclude us from having a successful investigation, successful prosecutions? Absolutely not, because we work very hard to make certain that we pursue every possible avenue to keep everyone on board and to be able to present a case in which we can obtain a conviction.
The only thing I would add to that is, you know, it's a responsibility of law enforcement from the onset to try and develop their relationship and make it safe and people feel trust, so that as it goes through the process, the prosecutor's office has the ability to perform their job too. The prosecutor's office and law enforcement on especially significant cases like those of violence are almost embedded with each other. The conversation goes back and forth on a daily basis. We have a meeting tomorrow, I think, between the Office of Public Health and Safety, Prosecutor's Office, and IMPD on the City County Council, at least in Indianapolis. Threw out $300,000 for a witness protection program. They say witness protection is more of a witness assistance program. It's not sending somebody to Arizona for the rest of their life, but it's getting people out of their home and the ability to move to another home, or getting them a cell phone and all those things that allow us to continue to have contact with them and may get them out of a situation where they feel safe to have conversations with the police and the prosecutor's office. It's those people who have that interest that I think it's incumbent upon us to make it safe so that they can do that. And this is the first time in a while that we've had the funding to kind of do that. So as law enforcement, I think we have to make it safe so that people feel comfortable and they have to trust us, and that's relationship building. But at the same time, when you have 50% of the people that got shot, you can imagine getting shot and being uncooperative, then there's something else going on there. And those things are behavioral and sometimes kind of institutional to those individuals and those families. And so there's some other resource that has to fix that. And that's why we reach out to our communities and those people that can put their arms around those people in a different way than law enforcement can, and try and help them out of that situation or get them to change their lives.
Chief Roach's point about trust is exactly right, and that's why, in terms of the question that was asked, why it's important that our deputy prosecutors and victim advocates make that contact up front with them to develop that rapport. We had a case recently where we had a female witness, so I'll call her Jane Doe, and we had a horrible time keeping track of Jane Doe, but there was one deputy prosecutor, in particular Jeremy, who had developed a relationship with her, and so Jeremy became known as the Jane Doe Whisperer, and it's obviously humorous, but it illustrates the point that how important it is that we develop, our individual staffers develop that rapport and trust with the witnesses and victims we deal with every day.
Mr. Whitaker, you had the next question here for the panel. And do you want to read your question, or did you want me to go ahead and read it for you? Okay. All right. This question is for Mr. Minkler. What is the level of crime for a person carrying a firearm into a federal building? What typically happens when the person goes before the federal magistrate?
So there are some rules, obviously, about, for instance, carrying a firearm in a federal building. It's prohibited. Even for me or anybody else, I can't carry a weapon inside a federal building unless I'm a federal agent. In the courthouse, not even federal agents can carry firearms in the federal courthouse. It's prohibited. If you do that, there are various penalties depending on how cooperative you are with the federal agent or the marshal or whoever is stopping you from carrying it in. But federal law on firearms is a little different than the state law, and I know there's been a lot of talk, I guess, about state laws and where Indiana, where you can carry firearms, churches, libraries, etc. But in terms of federal law, in terms of federal buildings and federal courthouses, that does trump, so to speak, the state law. And if you're prohibited from carrying it into a federal building, you can't do it. The fines and costs for doing that is really sort of incidental. I think you would find it's pretty difficult to get into a federal facility with a firearm. They usually have magnetometers and whatnot in our office, so that's usually discovered before it actually occurs, and you're sort of prohibited from entering if that's your goal, to go into a federal facility with a firearm. Is that helpful to your question?
Yes, sir. The reason I ask is if you're stopped by Federal Protective Services with a weapon, my understanding is it's taken and goes to federal court downtown. So I'm just curious to know how those people are handled. They come to court somewhere at the federal level.
Sure, yeah, obviously if you can legally possess that firearm, it'd be returned to you without any problems. I'm sort of surprised that you're not sort of given the option of going into a federal building without your firearm. That, for instance, they usually will have, for people that are legally in possession of firearms, they'll have locked boxes outside where you can secure your firearm, lock it, you take a key, go in, and then when you leave, you can retrieve your firearm. I'm always curious, as somebody that not always popular in a federal building, why somebody needs to see me with a firearm in their possession. But leave that for another day. And probably federal judges and people in federal courthouses are curious about that. But yeah, the federal law about bringing a firearm into a building is pretty strict, and no matter what the state legislature does in Indiana, that would not bind any federal laws. Helpful.
The next question is for Mr. Mendenhall. You have an impressive resume which consists of working violent crimes, gangs, domestic terrorism, counterterrorism for the 2002 Olympic Winter Games. FBI on-scene commander, Guantanamo Bay, international terrorism. These are just a few positions since entering duty as special agent on March 5th, 1990.
Somebody Googled you.
So besides being a native of Indiana, graduating from Ball State in 1986, what will be your main focus while you're in your current position, which started on February the 20th of 2018? And why are you placed? Watch out. No, no. And then why
Ask
were
how
you?
you like that new house you just bought too.
There's a lot going on in this question.
And then why were you placed in Indianapolis?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in that question.
What's your focus and why are you here?
Yeah, I'll start at the end. Why did I get, what was the last part of the question?
Why were you placed in Indianapolis?
I wasn't placed in Indianapolis. I actually sought this job. Like I said, my wife and I are both from Indiana. We've been gone for over 30 years and never thought we'd have an opportunity to come back here. When the opportunity, timing is everything in life, a lot of times. And had the opportunity to come back here. I've got 3 years left in my career and mandatory retirement. This was an opportunity that my wife and I couldn't pass on. Both of our extended families are here. I hadn't been a special agent in charge of a field office before. I think it's a fitting and exciting way to spend my last 3 years in the FBI. So that's the end of the question. As far as my focus, I guess I'll just talk about first 90 days. I mean, me having a new position as the SAC here in Indianapolis is not unlike anybody getting a new job in any profession. The first 90 days, you kind of have some limited things you're focused on as you get settled in. And I'm focused on primarily learning about my people. I've got about 260 FBI employees in the state of Indiana, which is pretty exciting for me because it's kind of I'll actually be able to know everybody in this field office territory, which is exciting. I just came from position as the assistant director in charge of the counterterrorism division back at FBI headquarters, and I had 1,200 people working for me. So having a group the size that I have here in Indiana and being able to know everybody to a certain extent on a personal level is really exciting for me. Second thing I'm focused on is what you see in front of you tonight, and that's my partnerships. Again, we don't do anything of any significance by ourselves, so that my partnerships outside of the office are hugely important to me as well. And then third is my programs and our investigative priorities, which are guided by the FBI's national priorities. with counterterrorism, no surprise at the top of that list. Other national security programs like the counterintelligence program, cybercrime, which I'm sure if you haven't talked about in Citizens Academy yet, you will at some point, and serious violent crime. Again, working with our partners across all those programs. That's really my focus in the first 90 days. And thank you for the dissertation on my resume. That was greatly appreciated.
The next question is for Chief Roach. How do you feel relations between community and law enforcement can be improved? Getting people to talk when incidents occur, person shot, witnesses is not willing to talk or wanting to stay anonymous.
I think the first part of the question is building relationships is the answer, and it's one incident at a time. We've been, as a police department, we've got 400 square miles, And 2012, our numbers dipped down. We didn't hire anyone. Our numbers dipped down to about 1,535 police officers. And at that point, we went away from beat policing or smaller geographic areas and went to larger areas, share the workload, and to be a little safer. And I think we have a large part of our police department that has grown up being responsive, reactive, rather than understanding how to really engage people, just because they were thought our job, and the job was for a great period of time just responding, waiting on that police run, responding, and then waiting on the next one and going to it. It was such a large area of travel, you always wanted to try and get back into the middle, like playing tennis, and wait on the next run, so you could get to it in a timely manner, because that's what you expect us to be there. We have an opportunity. I have 1,624 policemen today, but 100 of those are in some form of training. And so really my numbers are similar to what they were in 2012, because operationally, that's all I have. Back in 2012, there wasn't anybody in training, so that was a real number. But I'll have a class in June. I'll have a class in December. I'll have people coming out of the FTO program and out of the academy. So by the end of this year, those numbers start to creep up. By the end of April, we will be going back to beat policing. So the geographic area will have now smaller geographic areas that officers won't be able to fill all of those beats, but it changes the mindset of the officers so that they have an understanding that I'm accountable for this area. I may be working this area and this area also, but anything that goes on in this area, and it's my responsibility to go into the barber shop, it's my responsibility to understand the businesses, my responsibility to know the people there and the resources. And so we're doing that. It's probably not very smart of me, because I've got to do this twice. But I want to change the mindset of the officers. That Marion County is getting a new CAD, which means all the borders, it's an opportunity to change all the lines and help officers and emergencies, responders respond to those areas. So I'm going to have to do it again in 2019. But I wanted the officers to understand that that's where we're going, and for them to have a little more accountability now. So rather than being accountable for 15 square miles, then now they're maybe accountable for 3 or 4 or 6, which is a little better. And as those numbers increase, it allows us to minimize those geographic areas a little bit, so that you have officers that you know, and it's the same officer that's responding. And in my mind, until we get to that, until we get to the ability where the officer is engaged and understands the people that he's working for, those relationships will continue to be good in some areas and bad in others right now. But the goal is to be in all those areas and know people, build those relationships. When a lot of us came on, we did beat policing. When IPD, before the merger, you had smaller geographic areas, and I remember knocking on doors and introducing myself, and it takes you just a couple seconds to know whether that person's friendly or not. There's story after story of officers being in trouble physically, neighbors coming out to help them because they know them, or situations getting out of hand and someone being there because you treated them right, saying, I know Officer Roach, he's cool, leave him alone. And so it's that kind of relationship that we need to get back to, and it's just been difficult because the geographic area that we police is so tough. So it's again, it's one incident at a time, and it's treating people right, and that's how we'll get back to that.
And our last question for this evening for the panel is for Prosecutor Curry. In a case involving the death penalty, how is it handled if the prosecutor's office feels it is the best interest of the case to offer a plea and take the death penalty off the table, but the victim's family is steadfast against taking the death penalty off the table? Or on a smaller scale, How is it handled if the Marion County Prosecutor's Office wants to offer a plea in the case, but the victim or victim's family wants to proceed with trial?
I'll start with the latter part of that question first. We obviously, once we file a case, there are any number of things that could happen in the course of the case that will impact our decision as to how to resolve it. We will always communicate with the victim or the victim's family about our thinking and our rationale for doing that. And there are occasions where the victim's family or the victim, his or herself, do not agree with that decision. And we understand that, but ultimately we have to make that decision, that this is the appropriate resolution of the case for one reason or another. The death penalty is first of all, when a homicide occurred, when a murder has occurred, not every single murder would justify consideration for death penalty or life without parole. There have to be certain aggravating circumstances that are set forth by statute that would justify that. And in those situations, particularly virtually all of those are egregious enough that, such as the recent death of Deputy Pickett, that it's going to get a lot of publicity. And without exception, whether it's on Facebook or calls to the office or talking to the press, there's going to be the outcry of anger. We should fry that person. And because of that emotional response, we do things differently than I think has been done in the past. And that is, first and foremost, we meet with the family and talk about the circumstances and what we're looking at as we go through the case. And in terms of a decision by our office, we are frequently as angry as everyone else. But it's important we not make that decision because we're mad. And so we always step back and wait at least 30 days before we make a decision in those cases. And going back to then meeting with the family, what we talk about in particular is, if we go down this path, this is what it's going to look like, and this is how long it's going to take. And we share with them that the reality is that if we were to pursue a death penalty case all the way to conclusion, you're easily looking at 12, 15, 20 years before that would ever happen. And the family has to understand that. And in that regard, I see people shaking their heads and I'm just the messenger here. That is the reality of what would occur. It is frequently the case, and in the 7 years I've been in office, in virtually every situation, that it becomes more important to the family to have the certainty of a result and finality than to have that vengeance. And going back to the public outcry, it always occurs to me that that person that's so angry, and understandably so, a month from now, they're going to be going on with their life. The family has to live with that case. And in the 4 death penalty cases that have been resolved that in my 7 years, I quite honestly can only think of perhaps one person who disagreed with the decision to resolve the case by a life without parole guilty plea. And that one case was in a situation where the defense name was Kenneth Rackeman. He had killed 4 people on the southeast side of Indianapolis. And of all the dozens and dozens family members who were touched by that case, ultimately there was only one person who disagreed with our decision. And everyone else in all the cases that we've had have, after the ability to get over their initial anger, and that can take months and months and months, that it becomes more important that they have the finality and certainty to know that the person who's killed their loved one will never see the light of day again, rather than pursuing the capital punishment.
Thank you. On behalf of the City of Lawrence Police Department and the Citizens Academy, we really appreciate each of the panelists coming out tonight. We know that you have very busy schedules and a lot of other things going on, but we really appreciate you coming here tonight. Let's give our panel a round of applause.
And Curtis, if I could add something, and I'm certain I speak on behalf of everyone here, I would like to thank every single person who is here tonight and participating in the Academy. We do a similar program in October called the Community Justice Academy, where we address current criminal justice issues, and knowledge is power. And so it is helpful to all of us that all of you want to learn more about the system and have a better understanding of what all we do, and not only for yourself, but to share that information with your neighbors. So I appreciate that all of you are taking time out of your day for 10 weeks, I understand, to participate in this academy.
And I'm a little biased, but you've got a great chief for him to get all these important people together and here at one night. So he obviously cares about you, and for him to have that kind of power is significant for you guys.